A billionaire invited his cleaning lady to a gala just to humiliate her, but she revealed a secret that destroyed his empire. What began as a joke became the biggest scandal in Beverly Hills. Subscribe now for more powerful stories, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The sun was just beginning to set over the sprawling Barlow estate, casting long golden shadows across the marble floors and manicured hedges of one of Los Angeles' most prestigious homes. From the outside, the mansion was a monument to elegance and extravagance, an architectural bragging right perched high above the city, immune to the chaos below. But behind the French doors and gilded staircases lived another world, a world of cold power plays, artificial smiles, and invisible people. Celeste Monroe had learned how to become invisible long before she ever stepped foot inside the Barlow household. Dressed in a perfectly pressed uniform, her hair neatly tied back and her demeanor measured to perfection, she had been working as a housemaid for nearly 2 years. She moved through the house with a grace that few noticed but all benefited from. She knew the routine, the rooms, the secrets whispered behind closed doors. She vacuumed while board meetings occurred in adjacent lounges, dusted behind picture frames that hid safes, and silently served wine at family dinners where no one remembered her name. She was a ghost in a palace of mirrors, and that was exactly what she wanted. But everything changed on a Tuesday. Celeste had just finished cleaning the library, her favorite room in the mansion, not because of the people, but because of the quiet, when Benjamin Barlow, the patriarch himself, appeared in the doorway. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and eyes as cold as the marble beneath his feet, Benjamin rarely acknowledged his staff, let alone spoke to them. He was holding something in his hand, a gold envelope, thick, embossed, and unmistakably expensive. "Monroe," he said, in that clipped tone he reserved for ordering wine or sending back steak. "A little something for you." Celeste turned, met his eyes without flinching. "Sir?" He stepped into the room, his polished shoes clicking on the stone. He extended the envelope as if it were an award. "Our annual winter gala is this Saturday. Formal dress, of course. We've decided to open the guest list to a broader range this year." His smirk didn't reach his eyes. "We thought it might be fun to include some of the less expected faces." Celeste took the envelope, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. She didn't speak, didn't blink. "I'm sure you have something suitable," Benjamin added, and then, with a chuckle, turned and walked away. From down the hall, she heard the tittering laughter of Eleanor Barlow, his wife, and a few of her circle of ladies of leisure. The message was clear. The invitation wasn't a gesture of kindness. It was a trap. Later that evening, in the small apartment she rented in Westwood, Celeste sat on the edge of her bed, envelope still sealed in her hands. Her roommate wasn't home, thankfully, because she needed silence to think, to feel, to breathe. The invitation was a weapon, a setup, a means to remind her of her place. She stared at her reflection in the window. The city lights below flickered like tiny lies. But Celeste wasn't who they thought she was. Not entirely. She stood, walked to the closet, and reached into the very back. There, behind the neutral uniforms and old coats, was a large, flat case wrapped in muslin and tied with 2 faded ribbons. She pulled it out gently, placed it on the bed, and unwrapped it with the reverence of someone handling a relic. Inside was a dress, a black and white floor-length gown with intricate embroidery across the neckline and sleeves. It shimmered even in the low light. Classic, regal, timeless. It had belonged to her mother. Celeste Monroe wasn't born a housemaid. She was born into a story that had been erased by the powerful hands of men like Benjamin Barlow. Her father had been Lawrence Barclay, Benjamin's older brother. A name the world had forgotten. A name Benjamin had made sure no one dared to remember. Lawrence had been the heir to the Barlow empire. Brilliant, gentle, deeply loved. And in love with a woman named Julia Monroe, a concert pianist and Celeste's mother. Their relationship had been a scandal in the elite circles of Beverly Hills. Julia was black, from a modest family of artists and teachers. The Barlows had not approved, and when Lawrence refused to abandon her, Benjamin found a way to sever him from both the family and the business. Then came the accident. A car crash. Quick. Tragic. Publicly ruled as mechanical failure. Privately, Celeste had long suspected there was more to it, especially after her mother, devastated and terrified, had told her to never approach the Barlows, never use the Barclay name, and never speak of who her father was. But grief ages differently than truth, and Celeste had spent the last 5 years searching for pieces of that erased past. 2 years ago, she applied to be a maid at the Barlow estate. Not by coincidence. Now, the golden invitation in her hand felt less like a threat and more like a signal. The game had begun. The next morning, at the estate, the staff buzzed with rumors. "Did you hear?" whispered Marcus, one of the butlers. "Celeste's been invited to the gala." "No way," replied Yvonne, the head of housekeeping. "It's probably a mistake." "It's not," Celeste said quietly, walking past them with a mop in her hand. "I received it personally from Mr. Barlow." Their eyes followed her with confusion and, in Yvonne's case, a tinge of concern. "You're not seriously going, are you?" Yvonne caught up to her by the hallway. "These people, they're not inviting you to include you. You know that, right?" "I know exactly what they're doing," Celeste said, pausing. "And I'm going." Yvonne sighed. "Then wear armor, girl. They'll come for blood." Celeste only smiled. In the days leading up to the gala, Celeste continued her duties as usual. Dusting chandeliers, polishing silver, and watering the garden where Eleanor liked to pretend she was a poet. But behind the scenes, she was preparing. She had reconnected with Darius King, her godfather and her late father's closest friend, now a respected civil rights attorney. She'd shown him what she had uncovered: old letters, a copy of her father's unpublished will, a ring with the Barclay family crest, and, most damning of all, a death certificate altered in handwriting that didn't match the coroner's. "I think your uncle had more to do with your father's death than anyone knows," Darius said after reviewing everything. "You sure you want to do this publicly?" "He stole everything," Celeste said. "Not just the company, my childhood, my mother's life, my identity." Darius nodded. "Then let's give him back what he gave you." The night before the gala, Benjamin sipped brandy in his private study. Across from him, Eleanor reclined with a cigarette in hand. "Do you think she'll come?" she asked lazily. "I hope so," he said with a smirk. "We need something entertaining this year." "She'll run out crying before dessert. I doubt she'll make it past the door." But Benjamin Barlow did not know who Celeste Monroe truly was. He didn't know that her mother had once played piano in this very room, or that Celeste had memorized every face in the family portraits lining the staircase, not from admiration, but from blood. What he also didn't know was that some people come to serve, and some come to reclaim. The evening of the gala arrived like a stage curtain rising before the grandest performance of the season. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway of the Barlow estate, their polished chrome glinting in the California twilight. Photographers waited by the entrance, capturing high society in all its smug glory, draped in couture, dripping in diamonds, and smiling with the dead-eyed sharpness of those trained to wear masks better than clothes. Inside the estate, the ballroom had been transformed into a monochrome dream. Black and white silk draped the walls. Giant chandeliers cast dancing lights across the polished floors. A string quartet played on a raised platform. Crystal glasses clinked, and laughter echoed like a chorus of wolves in pearls. The Barlows stood at the center of it all, Benjamin in a tailored white tuxedo, Eleanor in a custom gown that glistened like a galaxy. Their daughter, Grace, shy as ever, hovered at the edge of the room, avoiding cameras and her father's piercing gaze. "Let's hope tonight goes smoothly," Eleanor murmured, sipping her champagne. Benjamin's smirk returned. "Oh, it will. I've ensured that." Just as he finished speaking, the hush began. First, a murmur, then a pause in the music. Heads turned, the doors of the ballroom parted, and Celeste Munro walked in. Not like a guest, not like a maid, like an empress. She wore the black and white gown that had once belonged to her mother, its silhouette regal, the embroidery catching every beam of chandelier light like fire and snow. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, her makeup minimal but precise. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Every step she took was a declaration. Every eye on her was a confession. For a moment, the room simply stopped. Whispers flared to life like sparks. "Is that? No, it can't be. She looks incredible. Why is she here?" At the far end of the room, Benjamin blinked, his smirk faltering for the first time. "Well," Eleanor said, her voice tight, "she actually came." "I wasn't expecting her to look like that," muttered one guest. "Where did she get that dress?" another hissed. "She must have rented it." "She's going to humiliate herself," Patricia Devereaux, a family friend and professional gossip, whispered to her table. "She'll crack under pressure, just wait." But Celeste didn't crack. She glided through the ballroom with a poise that seemed impossible for someone who had scrubbed its floors less than 24 hours ago. She met each pair of eyes with calm, unshakable dignity. And somewhere behind that composure, something dangerous stirred, like a queen stepping onto the battlefield she had prepared with her own hands. Grace Barlow, watching from the corner, felt something flutter in her chest, something like awe. Benjamin clinked his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, loud enough to silence the room, "I see we have a very special guest among us tonight." Celeste paused. Benjamin walked toward her, oozing charm with a poisoned core. "Let's welcome Miss Celeste Munro," he said theatrically, "our dedicated housekeeper who, tonight, joins us in the spirit of inclusivity." Laughter rippled around the room, but it was nervous laughter. Celeste simply tilted her head. "You forgot to mention the theme, Mr. Barlow," she said, her voice as steady as a blade. "Black and white, fitting, isn't it?" Somewhere near the orchestra, a violinist coughed. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "And what brings you here tonight, Celeste?" "You did," she replied smoothly. "You invited me, and I always take an invitation seriously." The room chuckled, uneasy. Patricia Devereaux approached, her smile acidic. "My dear, wherever did you find a gown like that?" Celeste turned to her without skipping a beat. "It was my mother's. She wore it to a gala very much like this one, back when the Barlows still remembered who she was." Gasps followed like thunder after lightning. Eleanor stiffened. Benjamin narrowed his eyes. "Your mother?" Patricia asked, confused. "Was she also on staff here?" "No," Celeste replied, her tone ice and fire together. "She was a guest, back when Lawrence Barclay still lived." The silence was immediate. palpable, almost audible in its own right. Benjamin took a single step closer. That's enough. But Celeste wasn't done. I remember stories about this place, she continued, addressing the crowd, of a man who loved music and books more than boardrooms, Lawrence Barclay. You may have heard of him, unless, of course, you've been told to forget. Grace let out a small, shocked breath. You're lying, Eleanor said, clutching her glass. I never lie, Celeste replied calmly. It's too easy for the powerful to call truth a lie until it's recorded. She reached into a small black clutch and pulled out a photograph, worn at the edges, but unmistakable. Lawrence Barclay, younger but undeniably himself, holding a baby in one arm and a radiant black woman in the other. A family portrait. That's fake, Benjamin barked. Celeste held his gaze. Is it? She turned to the crowd. Tell me, if it's fake, why did this photo come from your own basement, along with the love letters, the handwritten will, the piano scores annotated by my mother's hand? The guests were no longer amused, no longer laughing. They were watching something real unfold. You've made your point, Benjamin said, his jaw tight. Oh, I haven't even begun, Celeste said, stepping forward, her voice velvet-wrapped steel. You invited me here to humiliate me. But you forgot who I was before I put on a uniform. I am Celeste Monroe Barclay, daughter of the rightful heir to this empire. And I'm done being silent. The ballroom was frozen. You could hear the ice melt in someone's glass. Prove it, Eleanor hissed. Celeste smiled. I will, but not tonight. She turned to the guests. Enjoy the party. I'll enjoy watching the truth unravel. And with that, she walked deeper into the room, not away from them, but through them. A woman who had once been invisible now occupied every space like she'd been born to own it. And Benjamin, standing alone amid his stunned empire, began to feel something he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. Morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Barlow estate, illuminating the crystal vases and gold-framed mirrors that had survived decades of extravagance and concealment. But the shine of wealth was no longer blinding. Not after last night. Word of Celeste Monroe's declaration had spread across Beverly Hills like wildfire. By breakfast, whispers turned into phone calls. By noon, blog posts had become news headlines, and by evening, the city's elite watched with bated breath for what would come next. Benjamin Barlow, usually smug and untouchable, was silent through it all. He hadn't spoken a word since the gala ended. Not to Eleanor, not to Grace, not even to the PR team that demanded he issue a public statement. He simply locked himself in his study and stared at the photo Celeste had held up, the one of Lawrence, the baby, and the woman Benjamin had spent half his life trying to erase. It wasn't possible. And yet, he remembered that dress. Celeste, meanwhile, stood outside the estate in the cool morning breeze, her clutch still in her hand, her heels planted firmly on the marble steps. She didn't need to be inside anymore. She had everything she needed. She turned when she heard the car pull up. The door opened, and out stepped 3 people who would bring her plan into its next phase. Darius King, the civil rights attorney with a long memory and even longer reach. Dr. Emil Novak, the man who had once served as the Barclay family physician, now gray-haired and stooped, but steady as ever. Vivian Morse, a state-licensed notary and a state lawyer with a folder filled with documents Benjamin had hoped were long buried. "Ready?" Darius asked. Celeste nodded once. "Let's go inside." The butler who answered the door looked pale. "Mr. Barlow isn't taking visitors." "He'll want to see me," Celeste said softly and stepped past him. In the main hall, Eleanor descended the staircase with the precision of someone trying to hold on to her last thread of dignity. "Miss Monroe," she said coldly, her eyes scanning the people behind her. "I assume this is your idea of a performance." "No," Celeste replied. "This is a reading." Eleanor's mask faltered for a moment. "Reading?" Darius stepped forward. "We're here to formally present the last will and testament of Lawrence Barclay, dated July 14th, 1999. Eleanor turned white. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. "In the piano bench your decorators put into storage," Celeste said calmly. "Funny thing about music, it hides secrets." The study doors opened and Benjamin stepped out. His eyes went immediately to Dr. Novak. "You," he said, voice dry as gravel, "you don't belong here." Dr. Novak didn't flinch. Neither do lies. Benjamin looked at Vivian, then Darius, then at Celeste. "This is a joke." "No," said Darius, opening the folder. "This is legal procedure, and you're going to want to sit down." The presentation began in the grand parlor, the same room where years of silent injustice had festered beneath chandeliers and champagne. Vivian unfolded the original will, handwritten by Lawrence, notarized by 2 witnesses, and sealed. Dr. Novak confirmed the signature. Darius read it aloud. "To my daughter, Celeste Monroe Barclay, I leave 50% of my estate and shares in Barclay Global Holdings." Gasps from the staff. "Should I pass before her 18th birthday, I trust my brother Benjamin to uphold the honor of our family and execute my final wishes in good faith." The silence was thick. Benjamin's hands trembled. "It's a forgery." Vivian snapped out a second document. "Actually, it's not. I submitted it to forensic experts last week. Signature, ink composition, and paper all check out. Your father's handwriting, his initials, even the original ink blot from his favorite pen." Benjamin's voice cracked. "This means nothing. The inheritance was distributed years ago, legally." "Illegally," Darius corrected, "because we now have proof that you suppressed a valid will and committed a felony by claiming sole heirship." "You have no proof I saw this will," Benjamin barked. "Oh, but we do," said Celeste. She stepped to the side, opened her phone, and played an audio recording. Benjamin's voice. "Burn it. The whole envelope. If anyone finds out Lawrence had a kid with that woman, this family's name is done." Eleanor gasped, stepping away from him. Grace, who had appeared silently in the doorway, covered her mouth in horror. "You knew," Celeste said, "and you buried it, just like you buried my father." Dr. Novak cleared his throat. "I have something else," he said, removing a small metal box. Inside were vials, sealed, labeled, and refrigerated. "These are blood samples from your father. I kept them, not because I suspected anything at the time, but because when the symptoms began, they didn't add up. Years later, I ran a test." He held up a paper. "The results show elevated levels of digoxin, enough to cause a cardiac arrest when administered over time." "That's slander," Benjamin shouted. "It's a medical fact," Novak replied, his voice calm. "I've signed an affidavit. The police will have it by morning." Benjamin collapsed into a chair. His face, once so confidently cruel, now looked more like that of a caged animal. "Why?" Grace whispered from the edge of the room. "Why would you do this to your own brother?" Celeste looked at her gently. "Because he was never my brother. He made sure that the moment he silenced my father's legacy and tried to erase mine." She turned to Benjamin. "And now the world knows." Even if all this is true, Benjamin said, voice hollow, you can't undo what's been done. The company is mine. You have no claim. You're wrong, Darius said, because we filed an emergency injunction. Until this matter is resolved in court, all assets tied to Barclay Global Holdings are frozen. Why? Grace whispered from the edge of the room. Why would you do this to your own brother? Celeste looked at her gently. Because he was never my brother. He made sure of that the moment he silenced my father's legacy and tried to erase mine. She turned to Benjamin. And now the world knows. Even if all this is true, Benjamin said, voice hollow, you can't undo what's been done. The company is mine. You have no claim. You're wrong, Darius said, because we filed an emergency injunction. Until this matter is resolved in court, all assets tied to Barclay Global Holdings are frozen, Vivian added, and we've submitted a petition to recognize Celeste Monroe Barclay as a legal heir to the Barclay estate, which means, she paused for effect, if proven, she is entitled to half the company and retroactive inheritance, with interest. The room erupted in murmurs. Grace stepped forward. Celeste, she said, voice trembling, I didn't know, I swear. I never would have let them treat you that way if I had. Celeste looked at her, the ice in her eyes softening slightly. I believe you, she said, but belief doesn't erase the past. She turned back to Benjamin, who now looked pale and lost. You tried to humiliate me in front of your empire, she said softly, but you forgot one thing. He looked up, empty. What? I was born of the same blood as the man who built that empire. And unlike you, I don't need power to feel worthy. I just needed truth. As the team left the estate, cameras flashed outside. The media had arrived. Reporters screamed questions. Is it true you're a Barclay? Are you taking over the company? Is Benjamin Barlow being charged with fraud? Celeste didn't answer. She simply stepped into the waiting car. And, for the first time in 20 years, the city looked a little brighter. 6 weeks had passed since the world first heard the name Celeste Monroe Barclay. Not as a maid, not as a background figure in someone else's empire, but as the true heir of a legacy buried by greed and protected by silence. In that short time, the world had changed, especially the world that Benjamin Barlow once ruled. The estate was quieter now. Reporters no longer camped outside the gates. The whispers of scandal had given way to public trials, to hearings, to lawsuits, and to the slow, systematic dismantling of everything Benjamin had built atop stolen foundations. And in the center of it all stood Celeste, no longer in a uniform, no longer in the shadows. The courtroom had been full to the brim on the day the judge declared Celeste the rightful heir to Lawrence Barclay's estate. The forged documents, the altered will, the medical evidence, the audio recordings, it had all been enough. Benjamin Barlow had been indicted on multiple counts. Fraudulent suppression of inheritance, forgery of estate documents, conspiracy to conceal medical evidence related to wrongful death, corporate embezzlement. Dr. Novak's testimony had sealed the case. So had the financial records Vivian Morse helped uncover, transactions that proved Benjamin had siphoned millions from the company, hiding funds in offshore accounts, all while claiming full moral authority over the family business. When the final ruling came, Benjamin had sat motionless in his chair. Even Eleanor, who had tried to defend him for weeks, left the courtroom before the verdict was fully read. Grace had stayed, silent, tearful. And when it was over, she approached Celeste and whispered, I hope you build something better. Celeste simply nodded. That had always been the plan. The brass plaque outside the corporate tower on Wilshire Boulevard once read Barlow Global Holdings. Now it read Barclay and Monroe Enterprises. The old name had come down with a loud metallic snap. The new one had gone up on a sunny afternoon with little ceremony, but great meaning. Inside, the building had changed too. The executive offices had been redesigned, not with marble and gold, but with light, space, and quiet dignity. No more portraits of Benjamin Barlow gazing down from above conference tables. Instead, framed photographs showed employees, real people, receiving promotions, leading projects, mentoring interns. The walls now reflected the soul of the company, not the ego of its former king. Celeste stood in the center office, once Benjamin's domain, now hers. The desk was modest. The air smelled of fresh paint and jasmine tea. A single photo sat on the shelf behind her. Her mother, Julia, at the piano, with Lawrence Barclay standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder. It was the only decoration she needed. "Amanda," Celeste called gently. Her new executive assistant, once a janitor in the same building, stepped in. "Yes, ma'am?" Celeste smiled. "Let's drop the ma'am, please. Any news from Forbes?" "They're in the lobby, ready for your interview." Celeste nodded. "Give me 5 minutes." Amanda left, and Celeste turned to the window. The city shimmered below. 6 months ago, she had walked into this tower through the service entrance, unseen and unheard. Now, she ran it. But it wasn't revenge that satisfied her. It was reform. She had enacted sweeping changes: a guaranteed living wage for all employees, full benefits including mental health coverage, mentorship programs for low-income youth, flexible parental leave, a domestic violence assistance fund, quarterly profit sharing with all staff, not just executives. Productivity had increased by 37% in less than 3 months. But more importantly, loyalty, dignity, and hope had taken root where fear and exploitation once reigned. The Forbes reporter was respectful, curious, a little nervous. She asked questions carefully. "What was it like when you walked into that ballroom?" Celeste thought for a moment. "Like walking through fire to get to the truth. And now that you've come through it?" "I don't feel burned," Celeste said. "I feel alive." The reporter smiled. "Some people say what you did to Benjamin Barlow was cruel, that you humiliated him." Celeste didn't blink. Revenge would have been easy. Public shaming, lawsuits, destruction. But I didn't do any of this for vengeance. I did it for justice. And justice doesn't humiliate. It exposes. The next question was quiet. "Do you forgive him?" Celeste paused. "I don't know if forgiveness is a one-time decision or a lifelong process, but I know that healing begins when truth is spoken aloud, and I've spoken it." Weeks later, she received a letter from prison. The handwriting was shaky, the words tortured. "Celeste, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know you taught me something. The man I became was a shadow of the brother I once was. If I could go back and change it, I would. I see my children now, and they ask about you. They ask how you had the strength to protect our family when I failed it completely." She didn't respond. Some wounds do not close with apologies, but she kept the letter, not as a token of sympathy, as a reminder of what truth costs and what it saves. Helena Barlow, now divorced, moved out of state with Grace. Before she left, she visited Celeste at the office. "I wanted to hate you," she admitted. "You could have destroyed us, but you didn't." Celeste looked at her. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," Helena said, "but you protected my daughter's name. You gave her a future." and I'll never forget that. They shook hands. That was all the closure either needed. Celeste didn't seek fame, though it found her. Universities invited her to speak about ethics, leadership, social mobility. She declined most of them. "I don't want to be known for what I tore down," she once told a colleague. "I want to be known for what I built." And she built plenty. Under her leadership, the company launched scholarship funds for employees' children, a microloan program for minority entrepreneurs, an arts foundation in honor of Julia Monroe and Lawrence Barkley. And quietly, with no press release, Celeste adopted 2 children from a local orphanage. Both had been labeled difficult to place. Celeste didn't care. She brought them home to a quiet house on the edge of the city, warm, filled with music, and lined with books. She helped them with homework, taught them how to read emotions, not just words, listened when no one else had. She knew what it meant to be invisible, and she made sure they never were. One evening, as the city lights blinked to life, Amanda asked, "What do we call this chapter of the company?" Celeste leaned back in her chair. "Redemption," she said, "not for them, for us." Amanda smiled. "Then it's a story worth telling." Celeste nodded, watching the world below, because the true legacy of Lawrence Barkley was never his fortune. It was the daughter who turned silence into power, shame into pride, and a servant's footsteps into the sound of thunder. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that prove truth always wins. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from?